Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt like you're learning something in a completely different way than everyone else, but the world around you expects you to fit into a very specific mold? It's kind of like trying to play a beautiful piece of music, but, you're only given individual notes and told to figure out the melody yourself. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that really touches the very core of how we understand language learning and maybe what it truly means to be well-informed.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating in this deep dive is how one of our key sources, an insightful piece by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, it just completely challenges our common assumptions about how we acquire language. We're going to explore the critical but often overlooked differences in how many autistic individuals, and actually, significant number of neurotypicals too, process language, and the profound implications these differences have for something as fundamental as, well, literacy development.
Right, so our mission today is really to cut through the noise, maybe uncover why certain evidence-based practices might actually be detrimental, and equip you with a deeper understanding of Gestalt language processing. We'll try to reveal how existing systems can inadvertently block these natural language pathways and what that means for countless learners, hopefully giving you those aha moments about a significant yet often unacknowledged challenge in education and support. So let's maybe start by picturing language in a new way. Imagine it not as like individual bricks you stack one by one to build a wall, but as whole, intricate constellations of sound and rhythm, each carrying its own emotion and context. That's kind of how our source describes the experience for many Gestalt language processors.
Exactly. Hoerricks explains it beautifully. For Gestalt language processors, words don't arrive as single units to be assembled. No. Instead, they arrive whole, as scenes, as echoes, as borrowed constellations of sound and rhythm, imbued with emotion and context. So speaking isn't about carefully piecing together individual words like Legos. It's more about releasing a memory, replaying a pattern or a phrase that already lives inside them, a gestalt. It's never just one word, then two, then three in that sort of linear fashion.
Yeah.
It is, as the source puts it, always all at once.
Always all at once.
Yeah, and this isn't some rare or niche phenomenon. It's really crucial for you to understand just how widespread this is. Gestalt language processors are the majority of autistic children, and they also make up a significant minority of neurotypical children. So we're talking about a lot of learners.
That idea of language as a constellation is so vivid. How does that understanding then fundamentally clash with, say, the more analytic language processing most of us are maybe more familiar with, where we break things down word by word?
Well, it's a fundamental difference. For analytic language processors, like maybe many of us, language acquisition is a bottom-up process, right? We learn individual words, then combine them into two-word phrases, then sentences, gradually building complexity. Think of it as mastering the alphabet before you write a novel. But for Gestalt language processors, it's top-down. They absorb longer phrases, often called scripts or gestalts, and then over time, they break those down into their smaller individual components.
Ah, okay. So while one child might learn ball, then red ball.
Right. The other might start with, let's go get the red ball, as a single meaningful unit, and only later understand its individual parts. It's two entirely different developmental pathways, but they lead to the same destination. Fluent, flexible language, just different routes.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, our source makes a really powerful argument that the harm caused by some common interventions.
Yeah.
It isn't physical bruises or, overt cruelty. It's far more insidious. The quiet violence of being subtly reshaped to fit a model that was never theirs. And that can lead to a lifelong derailment of their natural language and literacy development.
That's a very strong claim, quiet violence. And a major player in this, according to the source, is applied behavior analysis, ABA, especially what it terms BigABA. Can you tell us more about what Hoerricks means by that distinction and how it connects to what she calls the funding funnel?
Absolutely. The source uses BigABA to refer to the large, often corporate and policy-driven applications of ABA. This is different from, say, more flexible, individualized behavioral supports. Hoerricks critiques BigABA for its rigid, mechanistic approach to language. Their methods slice language into what are called operants, specific categories of verbal behavior. These include mands, which are basically requests, like saying water to ask for a drink, tacs, which are labels like saying dog when you see a dog, and echoics, which are just repetitions of what someone else says. The approach then focuses heavily on repetition and reward to try and build these skills in isolation.
So for a Gestalt processor who naturally hears language as these whole constellations, this sounds like a fundamental mismatch.
It is. Our source vividly argues that for a gestalt processor, this operant-based training is like being taught to dismantle a beautiful song, note by note, and then being told to reassemble it into music. The rhythm, the emotion, the inherent meaning that drew them to the song in the first place, it's completely lost. It just doesn't work with their natural processing style.
And it's systemic, you're saying, not just individual practitioners.
That's what the source argues, yes. It's presented as systemic, structural, intentional. State rules often only fund speech therapy if it's framed as fixing articulation errors. However, they will fund ABA for speech when traditional, meaning rich speech therapy for unclear or echolalic speech is often left unfunded. This creates a deeply unequal playing field. Families, especially those on social welfare, are often left with no choice but to accept ABA services, because its methods are literally written into law and policy as the only evidence-based option available to them. It's a funnel, you see, channeling children into a specific type of intervention regardless of their individual language processing style. And the results for Gestalt language processors subjected to these methods, they can be devastating. Echolalia, which for GLPs is actually a natural and critical scaffold for meaning, memory, and eventually literacy. It's often treated as pathological or just meaningless noise. Imagine a child repeating a phrase they heard like, "It's time for lunch." To them, that phrase might embody the whole experience of hunger, anticipation, and the specific routine of their mealtime. For a Gestalt processor, that echo is a building block. It's how they process and connect mining. But under these systems, it's actively extinguished.
So instead of building on that natural pathway, the system essentially tries to shut it down.
Yeah, precisely. And in doing so, language development can be, and I quote, stalled 10 grade levels behind, and literacy can be starved at its roots. The consequence, as Hoerricks highlights, isn't a temporary setback or a minor delay. It's a derailment of an entire developmental trajectory.
Oh.
Children who are taught this way often arrive trailing 10 grade levels behind in literacy because their innate language learning pathway has been ignored or actively disrupted. It's a profound loss of potential.
That's a heavy thought. But how does a system like this maintain its stronghold, especially when its methods are, so fiercely debated? Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source suggests the very tools designed to assess language can actually act as gatekeepers, subtly shaping what's considered valid communication from the outset.
It's quite striking how these assessment tools define what language is. Hoerricks describes tools like the VBMAPP, that's the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment and Placement Program, and the ABLLS, the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills. She calls them Skinnerian charts. They reduce the rich, complex tapestry of human communication to these abstract categories of behavior, like those mands, tacts, echoics, and interverbals we talked about. Literacy within these frameworks gets flattened to just mechanical tasks like matching words to objects or identifier letters.
So they're not looking for narrative, for storytelling, for the joy of language.
Exactly. They completely ignore stories, songs, metaphors, gestalts, everything that makes language alive. A Gestalt language processor, child's natural, spontaneous scripting, those repeated phrases or narrative fragments that are so central to their development, they appear nowhere on these assessments. The way these children naturally use language is simply not measured and therefore not valued or seen as valid communication.
And what's even more concerning, Hoerricks points out, is how this creates a kind of self-referential loop in research. She cites studies like Peterson et al. From 2024. It's like these studies validate ABA tools with other ABA tools. They're measuring gains within what she calls the ABA loop without acknowledging autistic phenomenology or Gestalt language processing.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us? What's the implication?
It means they're effectively validating their own system, using their own rules. They're not looking outside their established framework, you see.
Yeah.
When we talk about autistic phenomenology, we're talking about the unique lived experience and perspective of autistic individuals, how they actually experience and interpret the world, including language. If you're not even acknowledging Gestalt language processing as a valid pathway, then any research within that loop won't ever discover it or validate it. It's like only ever using a ruler to measure lengths and then declaring that weight simply doesn't exist because your tool can't detect it. You're confirming your own biases by limiting what you measure.
Right. And the self-referential loop, Hoerricks argues, extends even further. She points to what she describes as a hit piece by Hutchins et al., also from 2024. The source describes this paper as dismissing GLP and natural language acquisition NLA as conceptually troubled, unsupported, and misleading. That's pretty strong language from the source. What does Hoerricks say gives rise to such a strong accusation?
Yeah, Hoerricks doesn't pull punches here. She states that the Hutchins paper relies almost exclusively on B.F. Skinner's 1957 book, Verbal Behavior, to frame its understanding of language. Now, while Skinner's work was foundational in behavioral psychology, Hoerricks argues it's an outdated, very atomistic view when applied to complex language acquisition, especially for gestalt processors. What's particularly revealing, she points out, is its almost complete ignorance of broader intellectual traditions think. Giants like Vygotsky, Bruner, and Halliday. These scholars, unlike Skinner, emphasize language as inherently relational, dialogic, and sociocultural.
Okay, can you elaborate on that a bit? What do Vygotsky, Bruner, and Halliday bring to the table that's maybe missing from that Skinnerian view cited by Hutchins?
Certainly. Vygotsky, for instance, introduced the idea that language isn't just a set of behaviors, but a powerful tool for thought and social interaction, developed through our cultural context. He saw children internalizing language from their social environment. Bruner highlighted the importance of language acquisition support systems, basically the scaffolding that parents and caregivers provide in meaningful interactions, the back and forth. And Halliday emphasized language functions like using language to express identity or interact with others, not just to label or request things. They all saw language as deeply intertwined with our social interactions and cultural contexts, full of meaning and connection. That's a crucial lens missing from the critique in the Hutchins paper. Hoerricks argues that by ignoring these richer, more holistic theories, and by relying on such a narrow, dated perspective, the paper isn't engaged in balanced scholarship. She suggests it acts more like propaganda, part of a turf war, to protect BigABA's monopoly over language intervention.
Wow, a turf war. And it sounds like the source identifies a striking parallel here, suggesting that the science of reading, or SERAR, shares a similar flattening logic to BigABA, reducing complex language to discrete behaviors, almost like a mirror image.
That's exactly right. Hoerricks highlights that both are described as parasitic industries bound to state mandates, presenting themselves as the only evidence-based and necessary paths. Just as BigABA reduces language to those verbal operants we discussed, the science of reading often reduces literacy primarily to phoneme-grapheme correspondences, essentially linking sounds to letters along with sight words and orthographic drills. It's different vocabulary, sure, but it's the same kind of reductionist flattening logic, as the source calls it. This phonics-dominated literacy curriculum is, therefore, similarly unsuited for Gestalt language processors. They're told to stop echoing and start isolating sounds, or stop chunking phrases and start sounding out individual words, essentially forcing them away from their natural processing style.
And this leads to something far more profound than just skill delays. You mentioned it earlier, what the source calls lifelong literacy trauma. It's not just about being behind in school, is it? It's about the shaping of self-understanding, the training into mistrust of one's own way of making sense.
Yeah.
What does that really look like, beyond the academic struggle?
Yeah, this is where the emotional and psychological toll becomes really clear.
Yeah.
Imagine being a child who naturally perceives the world, including language, in a holistic, interconnected way, through gestalts, through narrative. But then every system around you, every intervention tells you that your way is wrong, that you need to break things down, isolate sounds, repeat fragments. A child who learns that her own voice is untrustworthy and that reading is nothing more than cracking the code internalizes this profound sense of self-doubt. It's deep. They learn that story, resonance, and personal meaning are just extras, not essentials to language. It's not just a skill deficit, it's a deep invalidation of their whole way of thinking.
So it's not just about not being able to read or write well, but about feeling fundamentally flawed in how you think and communicate. That's heavy.
Precisely. This training, Hoerricks argues, doesn't just create delays. It shapes a sense of inadequacy. These lessons persist long after the drills are over, leading to silence, avoidance, and shame in adolescence and adulthood. We're talking about individuals who might actively avoid reading, maybe struggle to engage in conversations that feel too linear, or just carry a pervasive anxiety around language. It's a fundamental blow to their sense of self, their confidence, and their ability to engage with the world through language authentically. The source really emphasizes that this isn't an exaggeration. It's the lived experience for countless individuals whose natural pathways were systematically ignored or suppressed. And our source, Jaime Hoerricks, offers a powerful personal witness to this very struggle. They describe achieving literacy as hard-won on my own terms, through narrative and meaning rather than drills and fragments. Doing so in spite of the very systems designed to teach it. Their experience was one of navigating a system that just didn't understand how they learned and finding their own way through stories and meaning. This personal journey deeply grounds their current work with GLP students, where they see the same patterns of misunderstanding and developmental redirection playing out, but now there's a framework to understand it.
Right. So if these dominant systems are failing, and, as the source suggests, causing such deep, lifelong trauma for so many, what does neurodiversity-affirming literacy require? Our source offers a clear rebuttal, a different way forward.
It's a complete shift in perspective, really, moving from a deficit model to one that honors neurological diversity. Neurodiversity-affirming literacy, as Hoerricks argues, it just cannot be reduced to those atomized operants or phonics-only drills. Instead, children, especially gestalt language processors, learn through immersion and meaning. They grow through story, and they thrive when their echoes are honored, not extinguished.
Honored echoes, what does that look like in practice? Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Think of a child who repeatedly says a line from a favorite book or movie, maybe like "to infinity and beyond." For an analytic language processor, you might try to break that down into individual words. But for a gestalt processor, that phrase might represent the entire concept of adventure, bravery, friendship. You know, honoring that echo means acknowledging its full meaning, perhaps responding in kind with another narrative phrase or expanding on the theme. Yes, to infinity and beyond, what an adventure, just like Buzz Lightyear. It's about seeing echolalia and scripts not as meaningless noise or barriers, but as raw material and bridges that carry a child from sound into sense and eventually into flexible, self-generated language. This approach requires rich narrative input, conversations that loop and echo, and abundant meaning-rich interaction. And the source stresses that the research basis is there. In fields like usage-based linguistics, narrative pedagogy, and the lived accounts of autistic individuals themselves. However, this robust evidence is simply excluded from the enclosures of BigABA and the science of reading because it doesn't fit their predefined frameworks. It's sidelined.
So what does all of this mean for you, our listener? The source's message here feels clear, urgent, and actually incredibly empowering. It calls on us to reject the BigABA funnel wherever we see it operating, and to demand that schools, districts, and support systems recognize Gestalt language processing as a valid, natural developmental pathway. It really urges us to advocate for literacy approaches that begin with story, connection, and meaning, rather than those fragmented drills.
Yeah, this deep dive truly reveals that harm isn't always visible or immediately apparent, is it? Sometimes it's the slow erasure of narrative, the denial of meaning, and the foreclosure of futures. Understanding this quiet violence, as Hoerricks terms it, is absolutely crucial for advocating for more inclusive and truly effective language and literacy support for all children. It's about recognizing that individuals shouldn't be reshaped to fit a single model, but rather supported on their own unique and valid developmental paths.
Which leads to a final thought. If systems designed to help can inadvertently silence a child's natural voice and hinder their path to literacy, what other evidence-based practices in our world might be doing more harm than good by failing to acknowledge the rich diversity of human experience? What possibilities open up for individuals and for society when we challenge these monopolies of thought and truly listen to every voice, every unique gestalt waiting to be heard?